It's time to talk music, audio gear, and anything else that crosses our minds. I'm Mark.
And I'm Peter.
And welcome to the Hurton Audio Podcast. So, one of the coolest things in our collection of gear that we've sort of been amassing for quite some time is the Roland Boutique series. And I think the Roland Boutique series is pretty underrated as far as a lot of people go. Audio Pills and Bad Gear do great features on why the boutiques are seen as like sort of like a step down, but also all the things that you can do with them that are so handy in their portable style in like a desktop jam, which is really good. If you're ever on the fence with looking at them, check out Bad Gear's channel on any of the Roland boutiques. But yeah, I just wanted to shout out how cool of a range it is, and also just how compact form factors for stuff is that they're sort of becoming like a really cool Christmas present that you can sort of have like a supersized 80s keyboard miniaturized as a desktop synth in sort of modern music production.
Yeah, and the main pros and cons with this is that obviously they're more affordable. They're better value, I would say, than buying a vintage one because, you know, you can actually find them. But, you know, that in a project or home studio, you know, you don't have to allocate a massive, like, amount of space for these things. And then the cons tend to be that the USB powered, which can impart some noise. And as you say, Bad Gear Audio Pills on YouTube, they do some really funny, like, exaggerated versions of what this USB noise sounds like. And it's something really, I think you encounter it, but it's like you have to be rocking the gains really high. Like, it's the sort of thing where you're only really going to hear this USB noise if you track it to, say, like, too low gain in your session. And then you go, I'll normalize, or I'll, you know, getting it up in the box. That's when you're going to hear this USB noise. In which case, I would always advocate, if you have the tools, to use something like a denoiser, something like RX or some spectral repair will clean it right up. But I know that the premise is, why would you have a system that, you know, like, could impart USB noise? But again, it's the form factor. I mean, you think about this range and how small they are, but how powerful they are. And I know you can compare them to Roland Cloud. A lot of the range is available in software incarnations in Roland Cloud. But again, you get zero latency, zero, you know, like CPU usage, and the tactility of them. I know some of them do work as hardware controllers for the Roland Cloud stuff. But I still think there's a charm to having them in the actual hardware domain and actually being able to get a like powerful incarnation of them. I mean, the JU06A, for example, you see it everywhere. Everybody's got one, like from synthwave producers.
Churches have a few boutiques in their setup when they do studio behind the scenes.
Yeah, and it pops up in like, I believe like Mike Shinoda from Linkin Park, he has the original JU06, and a lot of people have the JU06A in particular. I think just because Juno is such a it's such a universal sound, and I think if nothing else, it's grown more and more popular because people like say Jack Antonoff will bring them onto a lot of the Taylor Swift songs, particularly on Midnights. There's a lot of Juno sort of sounds, and he's using an original Juno. So it's just a nice, familiar sound that a lot of people like, and you can work with it quite a lot. And so the boutique version is just a nice sort of, you got it. It's not the same as having like a Tal Uno plugin that's like a, you know, a different brand sort of reinterpreting it. And I mean, let's be honest, every single plugin company's got a Juno at this point.
Yeah, Akai has recently released the Jure or something like that.
Yeah, and Softtube's got one.
They're just, it's like you say, the Juno, the Roland Juno 106 and stuff seems to be cloned by almost everybody. And there's like true sort of clone remakes like you see in software. You get stuff that's like Juno adjacent, like say Nymphes by Dreadbox, and you even get like guitar pedals, say like TC Electronics just has a Juno chorus pedal, just, you know.
I think it's actually called June, you know, if you look at it.
Is it? What, the actual pedal?
I think it is called June. I think it's the June. I don't know if it's 106 or 06 or whatever, but it is called June. It's not called Juno.
But it's in the same form factor, like style, with the yellow button and all that.
Well,
it's
that's
laid
the
out
thing.
the same.
It's got the same sort of trade dress essentially in that sense. I think that's the right term of trade dress. But like you say, it's so recognizable, and a lot of brands do go very close to it. Like I always think the Tal Uno one is the best name because it's like, it's a pun at the same time, isn't it? You know.
Oh right, yeah. No, that's that. I never thought of it like that.
Yeah. So it's like there's so many of them, and I'm not saying that you need a JU06A to get that sound. Like I'm pretty sure the Tal Uno will get you close enough, and the soft tube one certainly will do some good stuff just because of the brand power stuff like soft tube, you know, the accuracy. But like I say, a lot of people will cite the Tal one, and I think the Tal one's it's either, I don't think it's free, but it's very cheap, I believe. Might be free, but that one, people love it. But what do you think? What do you think makes them so fun? I think there is a bit like we've talked about with the Emu stuff. There's that form factor collectability to them that makes them nice.
I think the best thing Roland did with the boutique range is the box being like a museum history piece on the back, sort of telling you all about the history and what it is emulating. So for anybody who hasn't seen it, each box has a picture and a description of the original unit, say like the DO5 boutique. It's cloning sort of the D50, or it's inspired by the D50 synthesizer, linear wave synthesizer from the 80s. So they all have like a little piece of history. So if you've never got a chance to see a lot of them, you can read about them and see, you know, like the full versions. And obviously that's the sort of sound set you're getting, which are pretty one-to-one, a bit like the Roland Cloud versions. My only worry with the boutique range in general is, have they been successed by the Roland Cloud itself? Like, are we going to get another boutique? There's currently 13 in the range, and the newest two, the JX08 and the JD08, come out in 2021, I think, or the start of 2022. So are we going to get another one? That's the question.
Is there 14? I think there's 14.
Is there 14? I thought there was 13. Hang on. 1, 2, 3. Well, I won't count them out loud. But
I just counted them in fours. There's 14 there.
Oh.
Sorry. Yeah, no, there's 14 there.
Well, there you go.
Going crazy looking at these, because they're not all exactly the same size. They're pretty much the same size, but width-wise, they're slightly different. Yeah, there's 14 of them. So that's quite it's quite fun. But we were speculating on if they do another one. I personally have my money on an Alpha Juno, because I think where they left off, like with the JD08, you know, when you think about Alpha Junos, I believe they're used for redominator sounds and a lot of the crazier sort of trance and dance sort of pitch based and modulation based, because it's got a very complicated either envelope or modulation sort of system on the Alpha Juno. I've not personally used one, but I've read a little bit about them. And so I think that would be like a natural jumping off point from the JD08, because, you know, I don't think we'd see them approach more vintage units. I think they've got I feel like the natural move would be to move further into like the 90s, really.
And also cover some of the products that maybe didn't get as much love the first time round. I mean, everybody... I mean, I don't want to say people are sick of the TR-09, TR-08, TB303 in the Juno, but
we've got
so many renditions of those units and so many sort of plug-in versions, sample packs, you name it. There's so much of those sounds. What was really refreshing about, say, the JD08 and the DO5 is those are sound sets that not are rare to find, but I just think you don't see that type of synthesis very much because there's a big analog synth boom with a lot of companies, and they're not really interested in like digital wavetabling and stuff. But that's sort of come back around a little bit as we're sort of like culturally, everybody's sort of talking about the 90s and millennium sort of music. So obviously the instruments of that time, which are very sample based, of Rompler sort of like digital synths, they're sort of having a resurgence with a lot of the electronic music that's coming out. Whereas before, I think there was a big like, right, we've just got brand new digital stuff, everybody wants analog, whereas it's sort of maybe a little bit more 50-50 now.
One thing that I have noticed when you're saying about how the DO5 is like, or the D50, should we say, go back to the source, is less common. It comes up on so many of the Romplers that we have, the actual classic Romplers. Like the amount of times you're scrolling through like an EMU unit or a Korg unit or an Ensoniq unit, whatever it is, and they have some version of like Fantasia.
Yeah, Fantasia has like a clone on almost every competitor's hardware synth that has a pun on the name Fantasia.
Or some reference to an LA sort of brass or LA choir or something being the LA synthesis method that is the that the D50 is sort of built with. And it's really weird because, you know, we talk about sampling and stuff.
Yeah.
But when you actually go through the library of something, particularly like when you think of EMU classic keys, you look and they're all Oberheims and D50s and Jupiters.
Profits.
Sounds.
Yeah, they've just gone and they've sampled an actual hardware collection and then put it in their slightly cheaper hardware collection to be like, you know.
So there's a real ethical thing with sampling where, you know, and when I say sampling, I don't mean sampling like a song. I mean like sampling a sound source, a sound sort of sound source situation, because like there's never been regulation on what you can sample, because technically by de facto all these instruments are royalty free, because otherwise nobody could use them. But that means that they can then be sampled by a competitor, or to some extent cloned by a competitor to make music, but they can't copyright it either. It's like one of those bizarre things. I mean, maybe this is where music should be.
I suppose on that note, with the hardware in particular, I suppose what you often find is like a sample pack, both in the form of, say, like an EMU Rompler unit, which is they've sampled a waveform, and now your modern sample packs, which you just get a like WAV of a note that you then is key matched. I suppose the thing is you get the sound, but you don't necessarily get the engine and the tweakability in those units that you would get. So you can get an Oberheim poly that sounds like Jump on like EMU classic keys, but can you filter it and modulate it and do those things that you would have the flexibility with an actual Oberheim unit to do? Not necessarily. You can do similar things, but you don't get the actual hardware and the parameters to play with and automate.
And in all honesty as well, the actual effect of sampling an instrument creates a lot of aliasing. I mean, you can try this in any DAW. You can take a note, even if you're using something like Serum or a popular VST effect, sample or play a middle C for about, you know, like 10 seconds or so. Let the full note sort of decay and everything. And then drop that into your DAW's sampler, whether it's a sampler track or simpler on Ableton or something like Europa. Sorry, not Europa, something like Mimic on, or the NXT on Reason. You know, each DAW has an equivalent. And when you pitch it up or when you play it around the keyboard, you will hear a noticeable difference. Like it doesn't it doesn't retain the same sort of performance characteristics. I suppose that's what you're saying, isn't it, Matt?
Yes, yeah. And it's like if you sampled a distorted guitar, it's not as simple as just moving it up and down the keyboard to get the same sound, because obviously the timbre changes as you do that in comparison to how it would on an electric guitar.
It sort of creates for those who aren't sure about how formants work and what exactly a formant is the characteristic that defines your voice. So when you go up in pitch and down in pitch, your formant sort of stays locked to how your voice handles it. Whereas if you say drop your voice, if you sing a note and drop it into a sampler, or like with the vocal chops, the way that they've become popular, it sort of gets that chipmunkified sound. That's to do with the formant being moved in a manner that your voice wouldn't naturally do it. And that's why it sounds strange to the human ear, because the formant is higher than it should be, because you've pitched the full note up. Whereas your formant wouldn't really change. The note you sing would change, but the formant wouldn't, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and that's sort of the difference between having the original. Like, you could probably shoot out a D50 to the D05, and there'd probably be differences. I mean, we talk about noisy USB ports, which really isn't much of an issue, but it's something that, say, a lot of people mention as like a downside with the boutiques. But if you buy a vintage Juno from eBay, you've no guarantee that it's not going to have a hiss on the jack out. And
that's very
these
true.
little things. Analog equipment does impart noise naturally, so it's sort of like a swings and roundabout situation with both analog and digital. It depends how reliable, I suppose, at the end of the day you want it. Analog may have a sweeter sound, some people would describe, but it also is less reliable. So it's hard. And obviously, just to know, using this example, I know the D50 is a digital synthesizer.
Yeah, well,
but I'm talking about, say, the actual electronical components of that synth versus the electronical components of the D05. Still won't be a one-to-one match.
The thing with something like a D05 is that it will be the most similar, because it's really, they're just taking that digital brain and putting it into a smaller box. That's the full idea.
Yeah.
Whereas something like the Juno, the main difference is that it's virtual analog, which is some sort of take on having a digital recreation on the raw waveform. And then after that, I want to say it's an analog filter, but I don't know. A lot of the boutiques,
unless you cracked out the manual and got the promotional video up.
Yeah, unless I read the specs, I can't remember if it's a digital or analog filter. But as long as the filter is sort of copying the main characteristics, you're going to end up with a similar sound. And the way they do the virtual analog, I'm not sure if it's purely algorithmic or if it is sample based. Because, a waveform, when you get to the raw waveform, that just pitches up, provided it's looped perfectly, and it's hard to really tell with your ears that it has been, pitched up and down, because the sample size is so short and there's no sort of, there's no modulation to actually give you context that sound has been manipulated. So it sounds, like a bit more realistic, whereas it's there's so many different methods of synthesis with FM and LA and subtractive, additive, granular, and then sample based sort of synthesis and wavetable. I mean, there is quite a lot, and a lot of people only really get into subtractive, but I do think that the wavetable thing, because of like Serum and some of these more popular synths like that, that is definitely one of the entry points. But really, a wavetable still works in the subtractive synth workflow after the initial wavetable. So definitely additive and LA and FM is the things that confuse people the most, I would have thought.
Yeah, and it's also something you don't think about unless you're really clued into it. A lot of people just look at a box and go, oh, that makes a synthesizer sound. They don't really think about what's under the hood or how that works or the history behind it unless you start like really getting into what synths, how synthesizers evolved from massive like rooms almost into like with the System 100 and the original sort of units.
Yeah, the original modular sort of series where like room.
It's a bit like when you look at like a 50s computer that took up like an entire floor of a building, like an apartment in America, and then how that can be like on your phone now. It's a similar thing with synthesis. Obviously you can get things like the Korg NTS2, which is just so tiny but can do so much.
Is this the you talk about the oscilloscope? Yeah.
Yes, the oscilloscope. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas when you think about what that tech would look like to put in like vintage tech, it would be massive because things have got so small for what they can do, and that's the best thing about something like the boutiques.
Well, you think about that. Say the oscilloscope. The older version of it would be like a 4U rack sort of size, wouldn't it? Because it takes that much
and it'd be deep as well, because oscilloscopes are really deep when you look at them. If you've ever seen one in person,
they often have them in school science labs, so that you may have seen one there, but you may be going back a bit. And then it is an interesting thing, though. Will Roland release more boutiques? I think it'd be nice if they put a couple more out. But again, if you're collecting them, it's like we talk about the Boss pedal collectors.
Yeah.
And that must be like the thrill of the chase. But man, they put out a lot of products and they are not cheap.
Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to buy every single sort of product in a product line, it can be very tricky. And obviously if there's only 3, it can be easy to buy 3, but like if you're trying to collect them and they're announcing them faster than you get paid, it can be like a steep slope to like not addiction, but just like how do you afford to buy it all. And like I say, with the Boss compact stomps, there's a few people who do collect them and try to get every one.
A couple of good ones on Instagram if you're interested in that sort of collection aspect.
But they announce so many every year. And like now you've got the Wascraft series and reissues, and they're just really doing a good job at Boss to just keep making products. But like with the boutiques, there's just enough of them to get them all. But obviously a lot of them are discontinued now, which definitely makes it very difficult. I mean, we got them sort of one for a while, and then we just sort of started chipping away at a few every here and there, and then we ended up only having the TR-09 and the DR5 left to buy, and they had been discontinued for a long time. And then that ends up being like bidding war situations where you can't just buy one, and that's where frustration hits him, because obviously the DR5 is built so you don't have to go bid on one on eBay, and there you are bidding on the boutique version because it's discontinued, and you can't just buy one from a shop because obviously it was discontinued before we really got into it, really.
Well, it's one of those things. We sort of got the JP08, then the VP03, and then there was a little while before we actually got another one, and then, as you say, it was just slowly chipping them off. And then you start to get close, and then you think, oh, I could have them all. And then you don't want to be that guy who like massively overpays for the very last one because you've got the rest.
Yeah, and I think also like with gear in general, don't overpay. It's so easy to say that, but like when you look at Klon guitar pedals, and people are charging $4,000 to $7,000 for them and stuff, it's just like it's the same stuff. Don't overpay. And I suppose you could say this with like original Junos and stuff, which their prices fluctuate massively depending on where you're buying them from, the condition. But I mean, only get one if that's something you want. And if you just want the sounds, just find an alternative, like say a minimized version or Roland Cloud if you really don't want the space. But it is fun to have a collection of stuff. And like I say, the best thing with the boutiques is the way, if you have them all, they sit on a shelf like books. That's the best thing about them, because instead of having like a massive keyboard rack where it's going halfway up the wall and everything's on top of each other and you can't even reach the top ones by the time you get there, they just go next to each other very easily on any traditional bookshelf. And that is such a underrated feature, because if you're in a project studio, you can store them easily. You don't have to worry about them. You don't have to worry about getting 14 dust covers for 14 desktop synths because they all go upright next to each other in square boxes. And that's one of the biggest things I wish other synth manufacturers did, was just the idea of not having to have everything on your desk at once.
I think the Korg Volkers are the main. They're all often like compared to the boutiques.
Yeah.
As a slightly more budget-friendly boutique, but they do operate with the same form factor. Like you could just put them all up on a shelf and you'd be set. Which is nice because you don't want everything to be racked or everything to be a desktop, because you only have so much rack and desktop space. You know, you need smart storage solutions in your studios.
I suppose the boutiques are sort of as space efficient, or maybe slightly less space efficient than, say, having 16 1U rack synthesizers. But obviously, the thing is with rack synthesizers is you can get 4U and 5U rack synthesizers. So, you know, my preference is I've tried to buy 1U ones for space sort of efficiency. But, you know, you could have 3 racks in a 16U rack case that, you know, big ones, and then the boutiques look a lot more size friendly and studio friendly, particularly like if you've got bedroom or project studios. But I just really think they're cool. I'd love to see an SH2011 one, but I don't know if that's going to happen, because that is a niche mid-2000s synth, and I would. They haven't even got an SH201 on Roland Cloud, have they?
No, I don't think so.
Not as far as I've seen. So
I also think, another shout out, I think JP 8000 or 8080, I can't remember how that line works. Yeah. I could see, because that's the one that has like the super saw, the original super saw.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool.
That hasn't been sort of tackled in the boutique line either, I don't feel like.
The main drum machine that hasn't been tackled is the TR-07. Or 727, should we say?
Yeah, well, I think what they would do is they would do the 707 and 727 in one box. But, you know, like how they've done the JU06A, but there's a 106 and a 60 in the same box for that one. I think they'd do something like that. But does it have the demand, I suppose? I mean, I could see it having the demand. It is sought after. I mean, the expansion for the TR8 is pretty nice, but also though I suppose the new range of era drum machines have like all of these built in as well, don't they? So they might find, if you want like the niche or the less popular sort of sounds, then just get like a TR8S and
the
and
only
do it with
thing that I've seen with like say the Gaia 2 and the brand new drum machines and stuff that you see, like you say the TR6S and stuff, is that the only downside you have with Roland Cloud compatibility with hardware synths is all the synths and hardware starts to just have the same sounds, and there's nothing unique about a lot of them. That's
they do like to drop an SH or a Juno into whatever they've got.
That's the only drawback. So like with the Gaia 2, if you've got, a very powerful synth, but then you can just put all your Roland Cloud stuff in there, if you pay an additional subscription and all that, to put them together. I do think there's something cool about that if that's your only synth, but I do think in a situation where you have bought that and you want another piece of gear, that Roland Cloud integration starts to be less and less worth it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there's something about having a new product that does something very different, very well. That's very cool. It would be great to see like a brand new drum machine in the boutique form factor, but I do think that Roland will try and do like a bigger sort of synth. I think they don't want to be sort of called gimmicky from what I can see. So they're trying to do like with the Gaia 2, bigger, full metal enclosure sort of things and all that, you know.
Yeah, the comparison is sort of like the Korg, the new wave of Korg products like the Op6 and the Modwave and things like that. The Korg seem to have really tapped into something. But again, they've done the Drummerlog, which is like a brand new sort of take on a drum machine. And you know, I was going to say, like, how do you do a new drum machine in, like, 2023, 2024? Because I mean, if it's not sample based, there's a sample for every possible, like, conceivable drum sort of tone. And then there's, drum mashers, things like polyplex, where you layer loads of stuff together. Like, how do you make a piece of hardware that is competitive and that is innovative and fun, in this environment?
Unless somebody creates a new chipset that nobody's ever had chance to use, it's very difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just been our thoughts on why we like the Roland Boutique range, and also just a little bit of like affordable synthesis and stuff, or affordable little units for studios that you could consider around Christmas if you're looking to upgrade your studio or buy something for somebody who loves music, and by that I mean loves making music. But yeah, anything else to add there, Peter?
Let us know what's on your Christmas list, and do you think it's affordable to buy something like a desktop synthesizer unit for somebody for Christmas, or do you think it's one of those where it's all situational, and some people, it's like people ask for guitars and drum kits all the time, and they get up there in price.
They do, yeah.
So I don't see why you couldn't get a little boutique or a little dreadbox thing for your desk.
Yeah. Right. Thanks for listening. See you next week.